All right, Nancy, bring us home.
I'm going to bring you home. So, you don't want to be right before lunch. You also don't want to be right before dinner, but here we go. All right, I am Nancy Deutsch. I am a professor at the Curry School of Education and Human Development, and I am the director of the Youth-Nex Center to Promote Effective Youth Development at UVA. I'm also a little bit of a middle school unicorn. I am one of those odd ducks that had a pretty positive middle school experience. And looking back, I actually recognized that I benefited from that experimental period of the 1980s. So I was in middle school in that early to mid 1980s period in a traditional junior high school. But my parents chose to put me in what, looking back, I realized was an experimental open cluster, right? There were no walls. It was done by a team of 4 teachers who were with us all day, every day. We didn't go through the hallways and change classes. It was a very small, what felt like a home within, a larger junior high. And I never set foot, basically, in the larger junior high other than the gym and the cafeteria. And I am a bit older than 21, but last summer I actually reconnected with my 8th grade history teacher, who's one of my favorite teachers ever and who looped with us up to high school, actually. And so those relationships were really powerful. So it is interesting that I am doing this work now. So what is Youth-Nex? I'm going to give you a quick overview of that first to let you understand where the Remaking Middle School, which is what I'm going to talk to you about, is positioned. Youth-Nex was founded in 2009. We're celebrating our 10th year anniversary. We are a university-based center. Dr. Patrick Tolan, who was our founding director, saw an opportunity to really expand and apply the science of positive youth development to address fundamental challenges facing societies around the world. So our goal is to really enhance the strengths of children and adolescents while simultaneously preventing risk. We take an asset-based approach, a positive youth development approach to that work. We also really aim to bring young people to the center of research, practice, and policy, and ensure that those of us who work with and support youth are doing so informed by their voices, knowledge, and expertise. We currently have 3 main foci of our work, the first being educational systems, specifically middle school, the second being out-of-school time environments, and the third being community engagement, particularly civic and political engagement among young people. And we recognize that these are not independent, that these all work together, right? We are a multidisciplinary center. So as I said, we're university-based. So we've been traditionally very focused on scholarship and on the research of positive youth development. But we are increasingly moving. I took over the directorship about 2 years ago, and with that we have moved into focusing more on translation of research, on partnership with practitioners and sort of research practice partnerships, and on community engaged work. And that includes collaborations with the Curry School's Center for Race and Public Education in the South. We are partnering with them on a curriculum called Educating for Democracy. That's a social justice curriculum for K through 12. And we're also partnering with the UVA Center to Redress Inequity through Community Engaged Scholarship, or the Equity Center for short. And we are helping to lead the youth and education portfolio of their work. So we are overall extremely focused on equity and social justice for young people. So why the middle grades? So research, as has been talked about a lot, has long demonstrated that there's a mismatch really between the developmental needs of early adolescents and the structures and practices of most middle schools. I will also say that I use the term middle school here broadly. So if we could rename, or when we were talking about naming Remaking Middle School, I should say, we really think of it as being all learning and developmental environments that serve young adolescents. That does not roll off the tongue. Remaking developmental settings for young adolescents. And middle school is sort of a term that we all know. So that's why we come to that. But we really are trying to think broadly about in-school and out-of-school environments, and also to think about families. So the Remaking Middle School Initiative is a partnership between the Youth-Nex Center and the Curry School and the Association for Middle Level Education. It was really an exciting opportunity to bring together the scientific and research-based resources at Youth-Nex and Curry with the largest professional organization for middle-level educators. And it's really, I think, modeling a true partnership between research and practice. So we know about the middle grades, right? It's been mentioned the importance of that 9th grade on track measure. It's also been talked about as an underfunded area. And alongside the importance of the in-school and out-of-school environments for early adolescence, we really decided that we wanted to sort of take this on. As this was mentioned, there was an earlier movement in this, and then it feels like things never really scaled. Right? So we're really focused on bringing together multiple stakeholders. We hosted a summit last February at Gallup in DC, where we brought together researchers and practitioners and young people to talk about middle school, and did a bunch of design thinking to think about how we would address that. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, give you a peek at how we have been addressing it since that time in a moment. Just a quick peek at some of the data about middle school. So the top is student engagement data. This has been mentioned before. Student engagement in school drops markedly, right, during middle school and levels off in high school. Not surprisingly, if school engagement drops, we would also expect grades and attendance to drop, and that is, in fact, what happens, right? And that tends to happen in middle school. I really try to push people to think about, rather than thinking about this as a consequence of the developmental period, what if it's not a consequence of that developmental period? What if it's a consequence of the settings in which young adolescents are not meeting their developmental needs, right? When we are in settings that don't meet our developmental needs, we don't do well. As adults, we often have autonomy to check out of those settings, right? Not always, but we have ways of doing that many times. Kids can't, right? So I really push people to think about, let's stop approaching it from it's a problem with young adolescents and say it's a problem with the settings that we're putting them in, right? In terms of not giving them what they need. Simultaneously, funding. There's a funding gap there. Those red bars are the middle level fundings, right? So on your left, the federal education spending, birth through grade 5. Then you can see grades 6 through 8, a little bit more grades 9 through 12, and post-secondary. And then you can see private foundation grants, right? Birth through 5 and 9 through... very low 6 through 8, a little bit higher 9 through 12, and then goes to post-secondary. So we're also not investing. This is also important when we think about, it was mentioned earlier, the large-scale investments in early childhood. If we are investing a lot in early childhood, which I happen to think is also very important, but then we're not investing in those middle grades, how do we expect there to be any return on our investment, right? You can't sort of bolster developmental settings for young kids and then be like, but we'll keep doing the same thing there and expect that investment to be continued, right? So I think that's really important to think about. If we want to protect the investments that we're making in early childhood, we need to start investing in those middle grades. This should not be an either or, right? So what are we doing at Remaking Middle School? So as has been talked about, research science has increasingly identified this early to mid-adolescence period as one of the most consequential developmental periods outside of early childhood, right? But as we noted, it also tends to be the most under-addressed segment. So the Remaking Middle School is trying to refocus the field on the exceptional assets of young adolescents and to draw from research, science, and everyday practice to help connect science to practice, to join researchers and practitioners, and to bring in the voices of families and youth. So we are trying to design new approaches as well as elevate effective practices. We've heard from a lot of schools here today that are doing amazing things, right? So our goal is not just to create new things. We want to create new things where that needs to be done and amplify those practices that are going on throughout the country and internationally that are being effective. We also want to build an online repository of best-in-class resources for the field and foster ongoing collaboration and communication. I want to note we have a series of values that we root our work in. We're rooted in youth development. We're collaborative and iterative. We take an assets-based approach. We value the great things already happening in the field, and we see everything through the lens of equity. So as I mentioned, this started at the Gallup Institute, at Gallup headquarters where we held this summit last February. And there were also a set of working papers that were produced for that summit. Dr. Williams wrote one of those papers. They focused on 4 areas: early adolescent development, teacher learning and professional development, teaching and learning, and leadership and organization. And they provided a foundation for attendees of that summit. So they summarized the research in very short, like 10 to 15 page papers that were written for a broad lay audience. They also all include 2-page key takeaway overview papers, and they're available on our website for free download for anyone who would like them. And that's sort of the starting point of trying to sort of gather the research evidence as a basis. So our goals are that all young adolescents, or I've come to start to say every young adolescent instead of all, because all tends to do group, whereas every keeps us focused on the individual. So every young adolescent has access to schools with environments and systems that foster positive learning and development, specifically attuned to their developmental needs, and that educators and parents have access to developmentally focused training, tools, and resources specific to young adolescents in the middle grades. So as I noted, we are thinking about both formal education and informal educational spaces and about translating the science for multiple audiences. So we're really thinking about how do we build adult capacity to work with young adolescents. And finally, our approach. We have a set of intentional and coordinated collaborations across a diverse set of communities. We have currently a set of design teams that are finishing up work. There are a couple people in this room who are on those teams. They are focusing on 3 areas. There is a design team focusing on connecting research and practice. There is a design team focused on teacher learning and professional development. And there is a design team focused on school climate and culture. Those were 3 of the top areas surfaced by attendees at the summit last February that had also sort of the most concrete and actionable next steps identified from people at the summit. So that's why we sort of were focusing on them. And they are going to be producing products in the next few weeks that we will then be turning out and making available this spring. We are developing a design lab working directly with schools and districts that seek to transform their own middle school practice, doing these middle school accelerators that would be summer workshops where personnel from a school would come together, work with coaches and a combination of researchers and practitioners with expertise to sort of focus on what they want to focus on in terms of using developmental science to shift some of their practices and structures, and then to get coaching throughout the year beyond that. We are hoping to pilot that this summer in Chicago. We're also curating a resource hub where both researchers and practitioners could submit material that would be sort of vetted in some way and be available to include both new and existing tools. And we're trying to also build a community connecting people across the country. I will say all the work we're doing are joint partnerships between researchers and practitioners. So all the design teams, for example, are co-led by a researcher and a practitioner and are equally made up of researchers and practitioners, and we're trying to hold that in all our work. We would love to partner more with the health sector. I think that is the one area where we have not had a lot of partnerships or collaborations with our work. And I think that that's just not represented right now in our community of collaborators collaborators outside of probably the mental and emotional health realm, and we would love for more health collaborators. So I would welcome you to be in touch if you would like to join us. Thank you.